that 39.6% of adults in the US are obese. That percentage has nearly doubled since the 1970s. I have a good feeling that this episode, particularly along the road, there may be some triggers along the way, topics we speak about. But these topics I speak about are being viewed from my position, from my perspective, and these things have happened to me over the course of my life at some point in time. So, although I may trigger some people listening or watching these clips, that is not to my intent. But trigger warning coming at you. Well, I was reading an excerpt from a book that I'm reading currently the other evening, and this is the title. Not the title of this book. This book specifically I've read previously, a few times, but this passage I was reading, again, I've read the book a few times, so this passage I have read in entirety a couple times, but for some reason this specific title of that passage stood out to me like a sore thumb for whatever reason that night. And it said, if you're over the ages of 40 years of old, chances are you're going to die one of these 4 ways. Now, it stuck out to me because I am over the age of 40 years of age. And I've had these things happen to me and or my family. Chances are one of these 4 ways, if you're over the age of 40 years old, you're most likely to die, and it will not be by a car accident. So here they are. 1 is stroke. The 2nd is heart attack. The 3rd is cancer. And the 4th is from dementia, or Alzheimer's, better known. I speak about these topics because not only has someone in my family been impacted, they have been also impacted in my wife's family as well. One of those 4 life-threatening events. Somebody's passed away, somebody's been sick with one of those illnesses, diseases, and have gotten better, thankfully, knock on wood. Not only do I know the shit is real, which we all know this is real, those 4 items I spoke about, I've witnessed it firsthand. So yeah, that's how we're going to be starting off with this episode, folks, so buckle up. What's up, everyone? This is Fit for Business with your host, Jarod Lehn. If you could do me a favor, if you're watching this video on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you are listening to this episode in your car or somewhere on Spotify, do us a favor and tap that follow button. Let's jump into episode 4, full force. To really hone in on one of these life-threatening events, I want to talk about obesity and how that correlates to the onslaught of heart attacks in the United States. Because this, my friends, is a topic I hold close to my heart. Here's a stat, I love stats, that I pulled from an article written last year. The data indicates this, that 39.6% of adults in the US are obese. That percentage has nearly doubled since the 1970s. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a statistician by any means, but that's an alarming statistics. So where are we going with this, Jarod? Again, I told this episode, it's going to trigger some people. Not my intent, just dealing with and speaking about real life experience that I've seen over time. I lost my mother at the age of 19. She herself was very young, 52 years of age. Very young. Way too fucking young. My mother, who I adore, I'll admit, I was and I still am a mama's boy. It's like the line Ryan Reynolds said in that one Netflix movie. Boys always come back for their mamas. It's true. And I see it daily with my son and my wife's interacting with one another throughout the day. It makes my heart full and I love it. I adore it. So my mom was born and raised in the Bronx, the boogie down, for those of you who know what that terminology means. She was a mere, 4'11", so she was a short woman. She was as tough as they come, tough as nails, a young Jewish woman being raised in the Bronx. As she got older, she kind of stood out like a sore thumb. And in the best of ways, I'm saying that, Mom. From your appearance with your makeup, your jewelry, and your fashion. If the term fashionista was around back then, you would, I guess, have fit that category. Everywhere she went, people know who she was. She was a people person. She had no qualms about speaking to strangers. She was very lively and very talented at that. My mom herself was an entrepreneur. I assume that's where I get it from. If you're familiar with the cosmetic line Mary Kay, my mother pushed Mary Kay very hard back in the 90s. So hard and so well, she accomplished not 1 year, but 2 years in a row where she had gotten the pink car. So Mary Kay, at the time, they possibly may still do this. They give their top performers the Mary Kay car, which in turn is pink. I believe back then we were rolling around in a pink Buick Skylark, I believe. back in the 90s. Throwback. I remember clear as day being embarrassed, like, oh, we're driving around this pink car. Later on, acknowledging my mother's life accomplishments. It's pretty huge. So that was one aspect of her entrepreneurship. So another aspect of my mother's entrepreneurship, my mother later in life, before she passed away, I'd say, I don't know, 4 or 5 years prior to her passing away, she had opened up a small retail boutique store. I live and reside in Orange County, New York. And within Orange County, New York, there is a town called Sugarloaf. Some of you watching and listening may be familiar with Sugarloaf. Every year Sugarloaf has a huge fall event where like vendors alike come from all over. People come just to come to the town, the area. Sugarloaf, Warwick, they're very close. People love the foliage in the fall. Anyway, she had opened up a retail shop called Once Upon a Lane. Very catchy, Mom, because it correlates and rhymes with our last name, which is also Lane, not spelled the same way. So she had this retail shop where herself grew and designed these relationships with clothing vendors that she actually met at Jacob Javits Center, which is a huge place in Manhattan, if you're familiar with Jacob Javits Center. My mother herself battled with obesity for years. As long as I can picture my mother from an early age, she struggled with that. I see pictures with her, myself, her, and my sister, and I can tell my mother dealt with that being in her life from as long as we were born, or we were around predominantly. If you saw pictures prior to having kids and being married, she was not in that stage of her life. Today, I have somewhat of a better understanding of how her obesity journey, started. Maybe having 2 kids, suffering with depression, made it probably challenging. Wholeheartedly, I get it. Not to mention my mother, my father now, who I have a great relationship with today. Back then, we were kids. She more or less was raising us as a single mom, Monday through Friday. For anybody watching that has kids, that shit is rough. It's not easy raising a family by yourself. Not to mention 2 children. I like to see we weren't horrible kids, but kids like to push buttons and they like to test you. Back then, when I was growing up, my mother definitely tried her knack of getting involved into fitness and trying to somewhat live a healthier lifestyle. I can recall. I remember, and if anybody, dates themselves back like I am saying this, my mother did this workout program called like Sweating to the Oldies, right? So this is like people were working out in their living room, at home, at a home gym, if you would. And they were doing this shit off of VHS tape, cassettes, old school. And then I can recall vividly my mom going to brick and mortar locations, physical locations for Weight Watchers. If you're familiar with Weight Watchers, back then, I kind of honestly say I don't know if they still have brick and mortars. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I'm speaking out of turn. I know predominantly everything now is done online, but back then you could go to a Weight Watchers consultant and speak with them in person before the internet, right? And they would give you all your dietary, nutritional guidelines, and Weight Watchers had meals and all this shit. So my mom did all these things when she struggled with her being obese and overweight and not healthy. If I can recall back in the late 90s, I would say 1998, my mother lost her father, my grandfather, back in like November 1998 again. And my grandfather, God rest his soul, who I loved dearly, looked up to Sol, that was his name, Solomon Stockman. He was old school, man, and he was born in 1905. So the motherfucker lived till 92 years of age. God bless him. He lived a long, fruitful life. And I love him and I miss him dearly. Again, we lost him at that age. At his time, it was his time to go. My mother was beside herself, as well she should. It hurts to lose a parent at any age, let alone later in life, especially when you potentially need them the most, when you're at your most vulnerable. Shit had gotten real for her back then, to the point where she suffered basically almost a mini heart attack from what I can recall. I'd have to dig deeper, maybe talk to my sister who was older, maybe talk to my dad, but that's what I can recollect. Now, at that time, when this happened to her, the doctors told her, Helen, that was her name, hey, You need to make a choice today, now. If you don't make these changes to better your lifestyle, your eating habits, be more physically fit, or try to start being more physically fit, you are going to die. You will suffer the consequences. It was really a pivotal moment in her life. And to be honest, and I'll say this, as hurtful as it is, she gave up. And it's very concerning, right? As a person, like nobody wants to lose anybody. And I'll say this again, as a son, I didn't want to lose my mom, but she chose to give up. So it's hurtful. So 10 months later, my mother passed away due to a heart attack, which essentially went hand in hand with one of the top 4 things I'm talking about: obesity. Heart attack, obesity, they go hand in hand, right? So let me paint you a vivid picture. The American Heart Association states that CVD, better known as cardiovascular disease, is the leading cause of death in the US, which nearly took 1 million lives back in 2020. I believe that stat is what I pulled. 1 million lives from a fucking heart attack. That's insane. And it's just not right. Like, people as a society, we need to do a better job of, people being more programmed and more like self-conscious and aware of their bodies. Now I get it. There's going to be instances and cases and one-offs where people succumb to heart attacks, and there may have been nothing that they could have done. They might have lived a healthier lifestyle. They might have had great choices. They might not have been overweight or obese. All those deciding factors may have not caused that, but there's a high risk that is the case. So, I wish the story had a happy ending for us, my family and I, but it doesn't. So the heart attack is essentially what took my mother's life, and that's where I was getting to. But just due to her lifestyle and not making those proper choices or decisions in her life, she just chose to go, a different path, unfortunately, based, given her situation. And it was a high risk situation is what I'm saying. It gets me choked up, and it always will, thinking about it, talking about it. But that is the reality. I say my family and I didn't have a happy ending because of course, what happened with my mother. That doesn't mean for someone that is watching or listening, that has to be you. For somebody that's watching or listening, that possibly might have a loved one, a mom, a dad, a sister, a brother, an aunt, an uncle. The list goes on. Doesn't have to happen. If it's something that can be rectified and somebody can change the future and a perspective of taking care of themselves, isn't it worth it? Isn't it worth the saying, hey, you got to take better care of yourself? It's that easy. Subconsciously, the events that took place earlier in my life molded me into the person I am today, 1,000%. Good, bad, and indifferent. The person who leads an active lifestyle. Not only because I know it can potentially help save my life, but help me live longer. And I enjoy being active. Hands down, I always have. I always like being on the move. As human beings, we are not designed to sit down on a couch. Ironically, right now, as I'm filming this podcast, I am sitting down on a couch. I know, let me hear it. But it's because I'm filming my podcast. I will be getting up after this and going training at the gym. We're just not meant to design to be sitting fucking down all day long on a couch, on a chair. Our bodies really are designed to test the limits and defy the fucking odds. I told you that was going to be triggering some people. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. We shall see. Let's flip the script, shall we? The other day, I was talking to a close friend of mine who is a well-known business leader in their industry, their respective industry. And he posed a question to me. And I hear, I get asked this quite a bit, not necessarily from a close friend. And they asked me, they said, Jarod, how do you know which people you can trust on social media and which ones not to trust? Because we're having a conversation of, a verified account as opposed to a non-verified account. And that's how it came up. So this is the topic we can go down, and we can go down the rabbit hole for a long time. And this is what I had to say. I paused for a brief moment because I know there was a lot on the topic I wanted to discuss and say to them. And our time was, somewhat limited. I used myself. I said, take me for example. I'm a marketer with, a fistful of followers across my social media platforms. To all my followers and listeners, so far, it means the world for me that you guys do engage with our content, my content, and keep on doing it. Let's keep at this. But for me, for someone who's never worked with like a PR agency, a public relations agency, if you were to Google me and stumble upon my social media channels, for me, my goal is to be real, to be honest, trade value, share industry secrets, and just be an open book and just be transparent. I got nothing to hide. So if you Google me, you'll probably find my social media handles. My website would pop up where you can peruse, and check us out. Get to know me a little bit more. I personally, I'm not verified on any platforms. I don't pay to be verified on any platforms. It's just not my thing. For my brand, I spit on, what I know, my life's experiences. I don't claim to be something I'm not. Take it or leave it. That's who I am. So that was my example and, what I said to my friend. Getting back to, other social media accounts, other influential people, saying influential because maybe they have a high volume of followers. I said, let's take an example for this person that you're happening to speaking about, right? They have, let's say, over an amassed 3 million followers across social media platforms. That's pretty fucking impressive. That's a lot of people. Like anything, when you're going to buy a product, you need to do the research, right? Got to do the homework. Start off, with the content that they're pushing, across the platforms, whether it's on TikTok, LinkedIn, or Instagram, argument's sake. What type of content are they pushing? Are they constantly trying to sell something? Do they come off like a car salesman? Or a con artist? Chances are they do. They are. Just hands down. 1,000%. And there's chances that they're not. But if they're coming off like one, pretty fucking chances there are. For anyone listening or watching, just do your fucking homework. If you're going to potentially buy from somebody that has a large amass of followers, even a minimal, depending upon like who they are as an influencer. And I'm not even just talking about influencers. Obviously, in this instance, we are talking about influencers because when you have over a certain amount of followers, if you had a verified account, if you don't have a verified account, you could be a micro influencer, a macro influencer, and so forth, depending upon like the amount of followers you have, right? Just keep on checking them out. Check out their feed on TikTok. Check out their feed on Instagram. What type of comments are you seeing on their posts? Are they negative? Are they positive? Are people clowning them? Maybe some of the followers that you have, they have, vice versa. Maybe you know some of them. Interact with your followers, do some more homework, DM them, message them, comment. Like, hey, you know this person? Da-da-da. What do you think? Have you used this product or service? Is it worthy? Or even just for consuming their content. Just because, again, this person has an amassed large amount of followers doesn't necessarily mean the shit that's coming out of their mouth that they're spewing is right. Who knows? It could all be a lie. This is all coming from a good place. I say this wholeheartedly for anyone watching or listening. First and foremost, if you decide to remotely buy a product or service through somebody that would be considered an influencer, if you would, just don't do it blindly. Do the research. That's it. Like anything. So that's what we have for you on this week's episode of Fit for Business with Jarod Lehn. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next week's episode.